Well, I mean, Tony Blair knows what he's talking about. I mean, he actually did make climate change a big issue when he was Prime Minister, and he thought about, I think, spending quite a lot of his post-prime ministerial time on the issue. But he's gone quiet since. And yes, it was a surprise to have him pop up and point out that we can make all the efforts we like in this country, but China's growth in emissions can dwarf the entire British output of global warming gases in just 1 year.
Yeah, and the fact that he is now coming back on the stage, John, is quite significant, isn't it? I mean, is he trying to be the ideas person behind Keir Starmer, do you think?
Well, he's succeeding, I think. I mean, Keir Starmer ought to listen to him and is listening to him. I mean, he'd be mad not to. This is Labour's most successful ever Prime Minister, three-time election winner. I mean, if Keir Starmer didn't listen to him, then he would need his head examining. But Tony Blair has also set up this institute, which is producing really high quality and useful work for any government that wants to pick it up. And Keir Starmer ought to make sure he gets there first. But the climate change issue is fascinating because it divides both parties. We've seen the Tories at odds on it too, because it is a very, very big issue. How do you get to net zero, and how much is it going to cost?
Yeah, and Nigel joins us again. Nigel Nelson, I mean, you've heard what John has said there about Starmer would be mad not to listen to Tony Blair. You would agree with that, wouldn't you?
I would indeed, yeah. And I think that the important thing here is it's not just about asking Tony Blair how to win elections. It's also about avoiding the mistakes New Labour made.
Sure.
So it's things like, I mean, Tony Blair's pledge card from '97, that famous pledge card, was hugely successful. He did cut class sizes to under 30. He sorted out the economy. Debt was 40%. It's now 100%. He got 250,000 under 25s off benefits into work and 100,000 off NHS waiting lists, and then realised he made a mistake because it wasn't about getting people off the waiting list. It was about getting waiting times down.
Yes.
So he then changed that, and so 18-month waits became 18-week waits. And so I think there's things like showing Keir Starmer, watch out for targets, because if you measure yourself against a target, they may not work. Another one was 4 hours, a 4-hour wait in A&E. Hospitals got round that by simply moving people out of A&E before the 4 hours were up. They were still sick. They hadn't been treated. So it's things like that.
They met their targets.
But they met the target. I think they got a 96% success rate. But the target didn't tell the full story. So it's that kind of advice that Tony Blair can give to Keir Starmer. And I think that as John says, he'd be mad not to listen to it.
And John, it's interesting, isn't it, when Nigel mentioned the pledge card there, I thought he was going to talk about the fact that Tony Blair used a pledge card in Northern Ireland after the Belfast Agreement, and he made pledges then. So it's something that he used again and again. So, but is that a 90s phenomenon, or how can he now really give strength and depth to Keir Starmer?
Well, I think Nigel put his finger on it there. I mean, actually, the pledge card turned out, I mean, it was a very good device for electioneering, but it wasn't a very good guide necessarily to governing. And, Tony Blair describes in his memoirs how he sort of looked at it once he was Prime Minister and scratched his head and said, what, is that it? And actually, it turned out to be very modest, and actually some of the targets weren't quite right. But what he's focusing on now is what governments ought to be doing, rather than how to campaign to win elections. Because I mean, he revolutionised that as New Labour, and a lot of those lessons have been learned. The Tories are copying it too. You've got Rishi Sunak's five promises, for example, which are a sort of pledge card style operation. But I think Tony Blair is much more interested in government and policy and staying ahead of the game on that. And that's why he bangs on about technology and artificial intelligence so much.
And tell me, John, were you surprised to hear Sir Keir Starmer say this week, when he was asked the question, what is a woman, he was able to say an adult human female? Were you surprised that he changed on that?
I was very pleased. Yes, yeah. He's this is Blairism for slow learners,
yes.
And I welcome it. I was very, very worried when Keir Starmer was elected leader, because the platform he stood on, I thought, was mumbo jumbo, and I didn't know where he really stood, and I still don't, to be honest. But I mean, if he's saying the right things, then that's half the battle. And the Labour Party's position on the trans issue was all over the place, and Keir Starmer, I thought, got it completely wrong. He's now in a much more sensible place, realising that you've got to respect everybody's rights, and that includes the rights of women to women-only spaces.
Yeah. And Nigel, did you see that as a moment? Because there had been a lot of confusion around Labour's position in all of this, and I mean, following social media and looking at all of the different positions which Labour had taken on the trans issue, he seems now to have given clarity, at least from his point of view, in relation to that issue.
Yes, I think it's been going step by step. He was caught out initially when he was asked, can a woman have a penis, and wasn't able to answer that question. And he's now thought it through. I think one of the problems is that for MPs, this is not a major issue. It doesn't seem to come up on the doorstep very much. The whole woke issue is very low down on people's worries. But Keir Starmer clearly had to get to a policy, and on the basis that he will still have a diagnosis of gender dysphoria before you can change gender. That seems sensible. He seems to want to protect women-only spaces. That seems sensible. I think he's getting there, and probably in government he will need to have another look at the Gender Recognition Act to try and get an awful lot of things that have happened since then, since 2004 when it came in, and get them right.
Yeah. And so finally, John, do you think he is looking more and more like our next Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, that is?
Well, I think he's done an absolutely remarkable job. I mean, I was among many who underestimated him. I mean, he's been helped, it has to be said, by the Conservatives doing the best they can to trash their reputation. I mean, the whole Liz Truss episode, which I thought, they could put behind them, because, Rishi Sunak was so obviously the right answer in the first place. And, once they got him in, he did put right all the things that Liz Truss got wrong. And she was only there for 7 weeks after all. But I'd underestimated the damage that has done to the reputation of the Conservatives for competence, and it really does seem to have destroyed it. So all Keir Starmer has to do is look reasonably competent and ask Tony Blair what to do. And as long as he does those two things, then I think he's heading for victory.
There you are, the recipe for success, which is there. Thanks, John. Thanks so much for coming on the show and joining us. And thanks, obviously, to Nigel as well for being with me today.